Imagine you were sitting in a café in Berlin. It is the year 1923. You order a cup of coffee. The waiter tells you it costs 5,000 marks. You sit, you drink your coffee, and you read the newspaper. You decide you want a second cup. You call the waiter over, but this time, just minutes later, the price of that exact same coffee has jumped to 8,000 marks. It sounds like a joke. It sounds like a mathematical error, but it is not. This was everyday life in the Weimar Republic. Today, I'm going to tell you the most fascinating, terrifying, and misunderstood financial story in human history. I'm going to explain how a modern, civilized nation completely destroyed its own money. We are going to look at the devastating human cost. We will see the total breakdown of society. But more importantly, we will look at the data. I will show you exactly who lost everything and who made an absolute fortune. Because in every crisis, there are winners and losers, and by the end of this video, you will know the playbook for surviving economic collapse. Let us go back to the beginning. How did we get here? Before World War I, Germany was a highly prosperous country. Industry was booming. The currency, the German mark, was backed by gold. The global economy was stable. You could exchange roughly 4 German marks for $1 US. Then, in 1914, the war began. To fund the military, the German government made a fatal decision. They abandoned the gold standard. They started printing unbacked paper money, known as the Papiermark. The government did not want to raise taxes on its citizens. Instead, they relied heavily on domestic loans and money printing. The German leadership believed they would win the war easily. Their plan was simple: conquer their enemies and force the losers to pay the bill. But history had a different plan. Germany lost the war. By the time the armistice was signed in 1918, the financial damage was staggering. The national debt had exploded to 156 billion marks. The exchange rate had dropped to about 8 marks per US dollar. This was bad, but it was not yet hyperinflation. The real catalyst came with the Treaty of Versailles. The victorious Allies wanted to punish Germany. They imposed massive reparations. France and Britain demanded billions in payments, and they refused to accept the newly printed, worthless paper marks. They demanded gold, foreign currency, coal, and timber. Germany was trapped. They had a ruined economy and massive debts. So the central bank, the Reichsbank, did the only thing it knew how to do. It turned on the printing presses. They started aggressively buying foreign currency on the open market using freshly printed paper marks. This created a death spiral. Printing marks made the currency lose value. Because it lost value, they had to print even more marks to buy the same amount of foreign currency. In the summer of 1922, a political shock hit the country. The German foreign minister, Walter Rathenau, was assassinated. Panic set in. The psychology of the public completely shifted. People realized the currency was doomed. The forward exchange rate for foreign currencies skyrocketed. By early 1923, Germany defaulted on their coal deliveries. In response, French and Belgian troops invaded the Ruhr Valley of Germany, the industrial heartland of the country. The German government ordered its workers to go on strike and engage in passive resistance. But those workers still needed to be paid. How did the government pay millions of striking workers? By printing absolute mountains of cash. This is when the hyperinflation tornado truly touched down. The numbers defy human comprehension. On January 3, 1923, a kilo of rye bread cost 163 marks. By October, that same bread cost 9 million marks. By November, it cost 233 billion marks. The US dollar exchange rate went from 4.2 marks before the war to an astonishing 4.2 trillion marks by November 1923. What does this mean for a normal human being? It means logistical madness. We economists use a term called shoe leather cost. It refers to the physical cost of managing money during high inflation. In Weimar, Germany, people literally wore out their shoes running to the stores. Workers demanded to be paid twice a day. They would get their morning wages, and the factories would give them a 30-minute break. They had to run to the market and buy food immediately. If they waited until 5 p.m., their morning wages would be completely worthless. Money lost its primary function as a store of value. It became a hot potato. You had to get rid of it the second it touched your hands. Banknotes became cheaper than firewood. People literally burned bundles of money in their stoves to stay warm. There is a famous story of a worker who brought his weekly wages home in a wheelbarrow. He left the wheelbarrow outside for a moment. A thief came by, dumped the billions of marks onto the street, and stole the wheelbarrow. The wheelbarrow was the only thing of value. The physical act of buying things became absurd. The printing presses could not keep up. At one point, they just printed numbers on one side of the paper to save time. Prices changed so fast that shops closed in the middle of the day just to update their price tags. The mental toll was catastrophic. Doctors even diagnosed a new psychological condition. They called it zero stroke or cipheritis. Accountants, bank tellers, and ordinary citizens went insane from writing endless rows of zeros all day long. Their brains simply broke. As the currency died, society collapsed. The German writer Victor Klemperer wrote in his diary, "Germany is collapsing in an eerie step-by-step manner. How long will we still have something to eat?" Crime skyrocketed. People siphoned gasoline from parked cars. They stole brass armatures and copper pipes from buildings. They ripped the lead off roofs. Prostitution flourished. Cocaine became the drug of choice. People traded their family heirlooms for a sack of potatoes. A lump of coal could buy a ticket to the movie theater. Decent people sold links from a gold chain one by one just to survive another week. The American writer Pearl Buck visited Germany during this time. She noted that the cities were not bombed, but the victims were everywhere. Millions of people were dazed and inflation-shocked. They lost their self-assurance, they lost their values, their ethics, and their decency. So, who were the biggest losers in this tragedy? It was the middle class, the professionals, the doctors, the lawyers, the teachers, and the civil servants. These were the people who did everything right. They saved their money in banks, they bought life insurance, they patriotically bought government war bonds, and they were wiped out. A lifetime of disciplined saving turned to dust. If you had a fixed pension, you starved. Union workers actually did slightly better because they could strike and demand daily wage increases, but the educated middle class was decimated. However, as I said earlier, every crisis has winners, and in Weimar, Germany, the winners made out like bandits. First, there were the farmers. They lived off the land. They produced real food. When paper money became trash, they simply refused to accept it. They demanded barter. They became the kings of the new economy. Gresham's law states that bad money drives out good money. People hoarded gold and tried to spend the paper marks. Foreigners also lived like royalty. If you had an American dollar, you owned the world. Foreign students used their small monthly allowances from home to buy entire rows of houses in Berlin. But the biggest winner of all was a man named Hugo Stinnes. You need to remember this name. He was called the Inflation King and the Business Kaiser. Stinnes was a visionary. He understood the mechanics of money better than the government. He realized that inflation was inevitable, so before prices truly exploded, he went to the banks. He borrowed massive, unbelievable sums of paper money. What did he do with all this debt? He bought hard assets. He bought coal mines, he bought steel mills, he bought shipping lines, cargo fleets, forests, and newspapers. He vertically integrated his entire business. He even bought a bank, just so he could access more debt. To ordinary people, taking on massive debt during a crisis seemed like a death sentence, but Stinnes knew the math. As hyperinflation ravaged the country, the real value of his debt dropped to zero. He paid back his billion-mark loans with the equivalent of a few pennies. Meanwhile, the factories, the steel, and the land he bought held their real value. They actually increased in value. By 1923, Stinnes was the largest employer in Germany. 1% of the entire population worked for him. Stinnes understood a fundamental economic truth. In a currency collapse, debtors win and creditors lose. When the financial system goes haywire, you must hold real, tangible assets. You might ask, where was the central bank during all this? Why didn't they stop it? The president of the Reichsbank, Rudolf Havenstein, suffered from extreme economic delusion. He believed in something called the real bills doctrine. He genuinely thought that the central bank was innocent. He believed he was just passively supplying the economy with the liquidity it needed because prices were rising. He confused cause and effect. He did not understand that printing the money was causing the prices to rise. In fact, Havenstein actually complained that the printing presses were not fast enough to meet demand. He was excited about ordering new high-speed presses. It was a monumental failure of leadership. So how did the madness finally end? In November 1923, the government appointed Hjalmar Schacht as currency commissioner. Schacht stopped the bleeding with a brilliant psychological trick. He created a new currency called the Rentenmark. Germany had no gold to back it, so Schacht announced that the Rentenmark was backed by mortgages on all the agricultural and industrial assets in Germany. Practically, this was nonsense. You cannot hand in a banknote and ask for a square meter of a farm. But it worked. The public believed it. Schacht declared that one new Rentenmark was equal to 1 trillion old paper marks. But Schacht did more than just launch a new paper note. He enforced brutal fiscal discipline. He stopped the government from discounting treasury bills at the central bank. He choked off credit to businesses. It was painful. Bankruptcies spiked, but the money supply stopped expanding. The inflation died instantly. It became known as the miracle of the Rentenmark. In 1924, the Dawes Plan was negotiated. The Allies finally restructured the war reparations, and American loans flowed into Germany, stabilizing the system for good. But the scars remained. The Weimar government tried to fix the injustice. In 1925, they passed the Revaluation Law. They tried to compensate people whose savings were destroyed. If you held a private mortgage, you got 25% of its original gold value back. But if you had patriotically bought government war bonds, you got a pathetic 2.5%. This was the final insult. The German middle class never forgave the Weimar Republic. The social contract was shattered. They realized that honest labor and saving were punished, while speculation and debt were rewarded. They lost all faith in liberal democracy. The hyperinflation did not just destroy wealth, it destroyed the psychological foundation of the country. Thomas Mann perfectly captured this when he wrote, "The market woman, who without batting an eyelid demanded 100 million for an egg, lost the capacity for surprise." The people were angry, humiliated, and desperate for order. They were looking for a savior, and less than a decade later, A radical politician named Adolf Hitler would exploit this exact trauma to tear down the Republic and plunge the world into darkness. The German hyperinflation is not just a chapter in a history book, it is a clinical study of human behavior. It proves that money is an illusion built entirely on trust. When a government destroys that trust, the fabric of society unravels. I want you to think about the lessons here. Watch the monetary policy of your central banks, watch the debt levels, and remember the playbook of Hugo Stinnes. When the paper money burns, real assets are the only things left standing.